Good afternoon, everybody. I hope you are having a fantastic Thursday. I am Kevin Todrell, General Manager of Army US Canada, and I am joined for the second time today, to my immense enjoyment, by our top-notch Director of Technology.
Fraser Hahn, happy to be here. Thank you, Kevin.
I know, I'm excited that you're excited, Fraser. So today, if you missed this morning, we did the sUas Throwdown. So we talked a little bit about DJI, Autel, the Parrot commercial platforms, and the Skydio X10 platform. Went through those in a bit of detail. So we will have that up on YouTube shortly, and there'll be a link. There will also be a full report published for the data in a couple of weeks that you'll be able to sign up and have delivered into your inbox, your virtual inbox. So this afternoon, though, our focus is on the blue sUas, and this goes back, excuse me, historically, we did like 3 years ago in the summer, I think, we worked with some partners who had us do in-depth in-field testing of the blue sUas 1.0 platforms. And so we have data from that. We had published data from that and went through it in depth at a time. And so we thought there's been some updates to the platforms. There's been way more in-field testing on a lot of the platforms that we have. So we have some additional data of these being used at scale. And we thought we would redo that historic testing. So that's what we're going to do today. So really, I guess the question is why exactly are we doing this? And so it's a good reason. And I think because, then and now, you don't see a lot of testing with all the platforms kind of competing head to head. So it's very difficult to get a feel for which ones outperform the other ones where, which ones underperform where. And really, it's just being able to see the platforms in front of me on the table here. It gives you a great opportunity to get a feel for size of the platform, shape of the platforms, all kinds of things. So that's one really good reason. Secondly, really to give you an opportunity to think about this as you're looking to commit to these platforms, whether it's a single use for some kind of contract that requires an NDA compliant platform, or whether it's a bigger program for a department or organization, government organization. So that's why we're taking the opportunity to do this for you. As always, if you have any questions, reach out to us after. If you have any specific questions during the session, please hit the Q&A panel. We actually can see those, so we will take care of answering all that. So I think the first thing I should go through is just put a little bit of context. So what is the blue sUas? What is the green sUas? What is NDA compliant? Let's kind of frame that up and who needs it. And so the answer to that question is the first thing. Let's start with NDA compliant. So NDA compliant is a U.S. Department of Defense supply chain requirement, right? And so this is really the standard that you need to apply to for some specific government or military types of contracts where they specify that. So there are NDAA compliant platforms that are not blue sUas, and the blue sUas platforms are also NDAA compliant. So that's the first one. So blue sUas was a very specific DIU program that had several layers of certification for supply, cybersecurity, and then a very specific spec that was built for the U.S. Army Short Range Reconnaissance SRR program. So they had the first tranche of those. They're in tranche 2 now, which is down to Teal 2 and Skydio for the selection for the winner of that platform. But essentially, that was a compliance standard. Originally, there was 5 products on that list. You had the Parrot ANAFI USA, you had the Teal Golden Eagle, you had the Skydio X10, and you had the Vantage Vesper. Since that, the DIU came up with a blue sUas 2.0 program, which went through a similar set of certification standards, but ultimately then added a wider perimeter, as it will, of performance categories. So there's an additional I believe it's 8 now platforms that were added to that, which includes 3 or 4 actually fixed wing platforms. 3 of which of those, or 2 of which of those are vertical takeoff and landing. There are some heavy lift opportunities. So the Harris Aerial, for example, the inspired IF-1200, and then there's a couple of kind of unique platforms. The Ascent Spirit is one of them, and there are a couple of other platforms. So all total, there's about 12. Inspired has an IF-800 in there as well. So we're not going to talk about those bigger platforms. We're going to revisit the 1.0s and the and their successors in that kind of smaller range. Although, as you can see, these are starting to get bigger, some of them. So the 2.0s we'll address in a separate, probably May, June timeframe as well, just so you can go through them. But those are the different ones. And then, just to really confuse everybody, we also have the green sUas. And so the green sUas program really came about because there were a lot of manufacturers who make NDA compliant or US made platforms that could not afford the blue certification, which is quite an expensive and time consuming process. So these were smaller companies, some of whom had excellent products that were not on the blue list. So therefore they were not eligible for those blue types of contracts at the DIU. So in order to mitigate that, they came up with the green list, which is administered by AUVSI in the US. And that is at a significantly lower cost that is going to allow a wider range of people to get into the green sUas program. It's still pretty new. Really, for us, nobody's really asking for it. So we don't really know what the end users are going to view it as, but it is a problem. So there's a couple of different things that you need to look up for. So specifically in Canada, if it's NDAA compliant, it doesn't have to be blue. There are a number of platforms that are not blue: Evolve Dynamics, Sky Mantis, the Delta Quad, just to name 2, which are NDAA compliant, but not necessarily blue. So for most federal applications and dealing with the US, you're fine with NDAA compliant. For some of our mil customers, though, what the military has mostly done, is they've kind of stuck to the blue list just to be safe. So it's not to say that if you're a military buyer, and it doesn't mean you can't buy an NDA or a non-blue platform. You can. The Lockheed Martin platforms, for example, the Ariane Sky Rangers. There's a number of NDA compliant platforms that are not blue, but for the most part, for the smaller ones, this is realistically going to be your options. And at this exact second, although there's some really, really interesting Eastern European made products, this is kind of really the best that you have in the size range that's going to be NDA compliant. So it's a good kind of baseline for that. So Fraser, did you want to add anything more about blue, green, and yellow and orange?
I guess just about the selection of these ones in particular, it's important when we're testing and trying to bring valuable insights to you guys that we do comparisons that are as close as possible to like apples to apples. So it's difficult to take something radically different and try to compare it to something else. And so, another reason why we have these ones here for you that we put through the paces.
Excellent. So great points as always. Now, I will add there's some funny terminology, and there's 2 different NDAA compliant acts. There's one from I believe 2016, and there's another one from 2021. And there are a number of products which are compliant to the 2016, but not the 2021. A great example of that is one of the flight control units that's used in these, and one of the controllers, one of the GCs, the HearLink Blue, which is compliant with 2016, but not 2021. So even though it's called blue, it's not blue. So don't get too confused. That's why we're here, to explain these things and try and sort it out. It's good. We spend a lot of time confused, but we hopefully know how to do the industry to find it. So last part of this, I will say, is if you're here and you yourself as an agency or have customers that require NDA or blue, these are your options. If you are looking at these as a general use platform, as they are right now, it's important to understand that these are 2x to 5x more expensive than comparable non-NDAA platforms. So from a value perspective, these are not going to be what you need. So I would look at our earlier session products unless you specifically need NDA or Blue products. From a performance perspective, we'll talk about it. There's some really, really good performance and improved performance, but none of these products is at the same standard as DJI or even Autel. They're getting closer, but they're not at the same level. So it's important to understand it's going to cost you more, and you're not going to get a product that's as good. So you're only looking at these if you have specific customer demands, or you're worried that you will have customer demands. There are certainly many of you that understand these. There's a whole bunch of these products in use in Canada already for that exact reason. So I just want to be crystal clear on that. And part of the reason is obviously parts. The big thing is remote controls. So the remote controls to be NDA compliant, those are more expensive than the aircrafts for the most part. And so that is basically doubling the case of the aircraft. And one good example of that is Parrot makes a commercial version of the ANAFI USA, exactly the same aircraft, one little licensing difference, but otherwise identical, double the cost. So it's important that we understand that up front. But if you're here and you have to buy what you have to buy, that's what today is all about. So let's talk about the testing and our parameters, shall we? So we tested these aircraft on 10 different criteria, and we'll go through them, and then we will review the products one by one. And so number one is battery life. So we look at obviously how long a flight time are these going to last. 2 is deployment time, how fast from out of the box to ready to fly. Number 3 is going to be the actual speed of the aircraft. Number 4 is the audibility, the decimals, or what I like to call the stealthfulness. Is that what I said this morning, or was it?
No, that's another new one.
Another new word?
Stealthability.
Okay. Stealthability. Okay. So stealthability, stealthiness.
I like them both.
The 5th one is GPS denied performance. Again, we'll talk about what that means. Number 6 is flight characteristics. So we talk about what did our pilots think about flying these things? How maneuverable were they? Number 7, we will talk about said GCSs. There's actually quite a big difference, and there's some really intriguing performance of the GCSs. We'll talk about that. Then we'll get into our sensors. All of these are both thermal and RGB. We'll start out with the RGB sensors, a little discussion of the performance options. Then we'll talk a little bit about thermal options. And then lastly, we talk about some of the unique features that are special to the aircraft that don't necessarily fit in that exact same category. So we'll kind of give an overall look and talk about where they are with each other. And then we will talk about the individual platforms. So let me just quickly again go through the platforms we're talking about today. So we have with us the Parrot ANAFI USA right here. We have with us the Teal 2, which has replaced the Teal Golden Eagle. We have with us the Skydio X10. So technically the X2D is still around. We are not testing it in this one. If you want to see our old test results, you can go to that. We really don't see it as a viable platform for the price, quality, and performance level compared to anything here. So if you're really interested in it, you can go back and look at it, but we won't be discussing it today. And then last but not least, the Vantage Vesper. It's funny when you pick up a Vesper versus the X10. It's a huge difference. Fantastic. All right. So without further ado, let's get into things. So we're going to start out with battery life. So Fraser, talk to us about the battery life.
Sure. So first of all, we're going to give some notes about how the testing was conducted as we go here. So the the battery endurance was measured in the course of other testing. So there's a variety of flight conditions and environmental conditions involved in this. So there's hovering time, there's speed testing, lots of ascending, descending, indoor, outdoor stuff. So this, our idea is that this is fairly realistic battery consumption for real world stuff. We used full batteries and we just stopped the clock when the battery got to 20%. Because we need some sort of clean cut way to do this, and also because at that point, really, your mission's sort of almost over. And so what we found is that the Skydio battery was lasting the longest, a little over 26.5 minutes average using our test parameters. The ANAFI USA came next at about 25.5, and then we have a real sort of outlier here with the Teal 2. The batteries lasted on average a little over 19 minutes, which obviously is considerably less than the others. This is something we've known for a while about the Teal, and there is work being done to have another package with upgraded propulsion system and batteries that should last longer.
Okay, so were there any surprises or anything like that?
I mean, I would say initially I was surprised that the Teal battery endurance was not so great, but like I said, I've known this for a while. So no real shockers this time, but like that's a major noteworthy outlier from the group.
Okay, and we'll address some of that and some potential mitigations when we talk about the specific aircraft. But that's a good one. And so I will say this: there had been some kind of internet rumors about bad flight time on the X10. We did not find that at all, right? So solid 26 minutes.
Yeah, it probably bears pointing out that many people are probably comparing this to larger platforms like the DJI M30 or the Autel Max 4T because it is a larger platform. But even compared to those, the flight time is not really significantly less.
Right. Okay, fantastic. Okay, deployment time.
Sure. So this was really to get an idea of how quickly operators can unpack these things and get them airborne when they need to move quick. So what we did is we just started from a fully packed kit, and we stopped the clock when the aircraft was airborne and the operator was able to maneuver properly. The quickest was the ANAFI USA, coming in just under a minute, like 56 seconds on average. So that's pretty quick. Next was Skydio, a minute 12 on average. The Skydio X10, and like previous versions, it needs to calibrate the obstacle avoidance system pre-flight, or in the case of the X10, it's actually going to take off and spin around. And only once it's finished that can the operator actually maneuver. So that we decided to stop the clock at that point because the operator can't do anything prior to that moment. So that's adding a little bit extra time. The Teal came in slowest. It was about a minute 20-ish seconds on average. The Teal, first of all, we really assessed that the Teal requires GPS lock to fly properly. It doesn't have any ability to hold position without GPS. And so to take off in safe flying mode, P mode, we really need to wait for GPS lock with the Teal, and that added some time.
Fantastic. Okay. The top speed.
Okay, this is always a fun one. We just want to know how quickly these things move. Manufacturers report specs. We don't really expect any surprises, but we do want to, confirm those. And so we found that the ANAFI USA flies 15 meters per second, give or take. That's on par with the spec. So no surprise there. The Teal flies about 10 meters per second in position mode. And then if you are comfortable switching to altitude mode, then it'll go about 12 meters per second. Major caveat there, altitude mode is it's very rarely appropriate, right? Especially if you're going to go bombing around long distances at high speed. I would never suggest flying in altitude mode unless you have third-person view of the aircraft at relatively close range, such that you can determine its heading. And so take that with a grain of salt. It will go 12 meters per second, but that's in altitude mode with no position hold capability, and probably don't want to do that. The slowest was the Skydio. It accelerates really quickly, but it caps out at about 9 meters per second. That's obviously like a hard limit built into the software because it probably accelerates faster than either of the other two platforms. It's just that it will not give you a high top speed. And that's related to Skydio's sort of heavy reliance on obstacle avoidance and so on.
Okay. Stealth ability.
Stealth ability. Okay, so we measured stealth ability with a decibel meter. All these platforms are really close. Like they're between 82 and 84 decibels, which is not really like a noticeable difference to the human ear. The ANAFI is a little bit quieter, which we would expect because it's smaller. It's much lighter. It weighs probably less than half as much of a Teal. We could confirm that, but ANAFI USA is like 400 and something grams. It's very light, so it really should be much quieter. It's important to say here that there's a lot of factors that go into the stealth ability of a drone. We measured the volume hovering stationary indoors. When the aircraft is maneuvering, if it's affected by wind, that's going to play into the how far the sound travels, as is the specific pitch of sound that comes off of the aircraft. So there's only so many things we can control for, but this is what we found. The ANAFI is a little bit quieter.
Okay, fantastic. All right, GPS denied.
Okay, so here it's a little bit less of apples to apples comparison, so we need to get a little bit nuanced. And because we're talking about blue list platforms, we'll talk about confined spaces, but also real GPS denied outdoor space in case there's some sort of, Okay, so in confined spaces, we'll start with the ANAFI USA. It can fly well in confined spaces without GPS. It simply uses a downward facing sensor to basically observe whether it's moving by looking at the ground. That works pretty well. Those types of systems have been in use for probably 6 years or so now. And so it holds position quite well. It flies predictably inside. It probably holds position actually better indoors than it does outdoors, provided you have good lighting and you're reasonably close to the ground. And by reasonably close, I mean like 7 or 8 meters or something like that. So a careful pilot can very easily fly the aircraft effectively indoors. There's no obstacle avoidance. You're going to want to go slow. If you cannot see the aircraft and you're flying like first-person view, that's going to be tough. You need a lot of practice to do that well, but it certainly can be done. The Skydio, flying in a confined space indoors, well, that's kind of what Skydio's secret sauce is all about. They have this very fancy obstacle avoidance system based on visual sensors and optical flow, and that works quite well. With most systems, you would actually turn obstacle avoidance off indoors, but with the Skydio, you can actually reduce the size of the obstacle avoidance bubble and fly fairly effectively with the obstacle avoidance still on. Bit of a caveat there. We'll get to flight characteristics later, but the Skydio is not very precise in flight control, and so that comes into play a lot in confined spaces. So do keep that in mind. The Teal 2 really has no ability to fly in confined spaces, okay? It does not have any visual odometry going on. It doesn't have any ability to hold position without GPS. And so as soon as you fly into an interior space, it basically goes into ADI mode. And so technically you can fly in there, but unless you have a third-person view of the aircraft, you're almost certainly going to crash immediately because it's drifting around laterally, backwards maybe. You're going to crash very rapidly. So effectively, no ability to fly that indoors. So do keep that in mind. Real caveat around all of that is that you shouldn't fly any of these in interior spaces anyway. Even, let's take the Skydio, for example. You could fly it effectively in a shopping mall or a warehouse, sure, but it cannot fit through interior doors. So you can't clear houses with these platforms at all. You should really use a dedicated confined space drone, like, I would say like a DJI Avata, but if we're talking blue list, something like a Brink, is that?
Technically NDA compliant, not on the
Okay,
blue list, but
okay.
yes, I believe NDA compliant.
You want to use something of that nature. None of these are really well suited to the task. Yep.
Yeah, and I think I think the important thing to add to it is we tested these things in indoor environments pretty extensively, and as Fraser said, you know, you're going to be tactically, if you have to do room clearing or something in small areas, you're going to want a shrouded cheap drone or even an FPV drone. And so we went through some DRDC funded testing with the RCMP hosted. We had like 40 different platforms, everything except for the X10 was there. We did have an X2D, the predecessor, and overwhelmingly the ones that were selected were small, shrouded rotor type or some kind of caged type drones. Those are the best performers. And one of the surprising things was in the first round of testing, we had something like the ANAFI USA, which does not have any obstacle avoidance. And that ended up being the best performer, again, not optimal by any stretch, but the best performer for indoor operations. And that was just because it was very maneuverable, as we'll talk about in a second. You could have shrouded routers, and it's small. And so it had excellent hold. So again, get a purpose-built one. These things are not really designed. The other thing is with the GPS, I can tell you, unfortunately, none of these drones is functional in the Ukrainian heavily jammed environment, and so they've all tried and failed, and so they're not there yet. People are certainly working on the hardened radios, but interestingly enough, the Eastern European companies that are small are far ahead of the North American equivalents. But the good news is, if that's something that matters to you, all of these companies, ARM-US, lots of other people are working on hardened radio systems, hardened GPS systems that are going to allow for that. So it is an issue people are working in, and we'll get it. And we've had, years of rapid development. But typically, most of the customers are looking for it as room clearing and tactical. And again, if you have to do it, the smallest one and the cheapest one possible is the way to go. So, all right. So let's segue in then to the flight characteristics.
Sure, and because we touched on it before, I guess we'll talk about the Skydio first. So flight characteristics actually do vary pretty widely across these platforms. This is, again, it's a slightly subjective topic, but I have to say that the Skydio platforms, all of them actually, in general, they don't feel very precise flight control. Their entire philosophy of the user experience is to rely heavily on this obstacle avoidance. And so I have the sense when I'm flying a Skydio that I kind of suggest that it do something, and then it does something kind of like that with at least a 1 second delay. So it's really interpreting my inputs, looking at the environment, and then deciding how best to do that on its own. So I find it very difficult to position the aircraft precisely. I don't find its responses to my inputs all that predictable. Definitely not a very crisp flight characteristic experience, in my view. For some, that may not matter. It's definitely something I could get used to. It's just it's a little unfamiliar for me, and I prefer something that's a little sharper. The ANAFI USA, as Kevin mentioned, it can perform well indoors. One of the reasons it does this is that it's got very customizable flight characteristics. So it's the only platform really where we can adjust yaw rate, max attitude, ascent and descent speed, max horizontal velocity, and we can adjust all those parameters and save several preset profiles so that we could quickly toggle between those profiles. So you could set up an indoor flight characteristics profile, an outdoor one, and then a kind of a maximum speed one, and toggle through all those like pretty quickly. So it's very unique, and we really appreciate that we can do that. For anyone who's really an experienced pilot, they're gonna like having that capability and those options. Aside from the customizability, it's actually just generally very good flight characteristics. It's very predictable. There's not a significant delay. It feels very crisp. So it's pretty much up to industry standard as far as the responsiveness that the pilot feels. So not much more I can say about that. It's always been great in that regard. That hasn't changed.
Excellent. And so, yeah, and we found like the two people that really love the ANAFI USA are really, really experienced pilots that can tune it exactly how they want it. They tend to really appreciate that. Or really, really new pilots that want a very toned down and slow version, so they can learn and not have all kinds of crazy moving. So, so that's it. But again, I think I think we've seen some significant improvements in a lot of these things. And again, I'll echo what Fraser said about the Skydio. Obstacle avoidance is such a big important part of what they do. They really look at that as this idea of smart drone kind of dumb pilot, so you can just pick it up and not have to worry about crashing into things. Okay.
So
GCS.
we've got to talk about the Teal flight characteristics.
Oh, that's my bad. Sorry.
No problem. We've got time. So the Teal, I would say, is middle of the pack here as far as flight characteristics. It's very predictable, but the responsive is a little bit slow. The control sticks, this is sort of a weird thing to nitpick, but the thumbsticks are a little bit short. I don't feel I have a very big range of inputs. It's kind of like, 30% input, 60, and then full. And so to me, that's less than ideal. However, with a little bit of practice, it's not really a huge problem. I'm still feeling that the relationship between input and response is fairly predictable. I can get the aircraft where I need it. It's just feeling maybe a little bit sluggish.
Okay. All right, now GCS.
Now let's do it.
There's a segue. So I mentioned cost of the GCS. This is the Teal TAC. So the good news is, you're paying a lot of money for it, but you get good size, right? So you get good size. It's kind of heavy. If you got a hit, yes, it's good. Heavy is reliable. If you can hit him with it, yeah. No, we're not doing okay.
No,
anyways, it's good. We are doing that. All right, Boris the Blade. It's got to come out. Yeah, I get to do it. Anyways, so you're going to see significantly bigger ones. So, so why don't we, since I'm holding it, why don't we start with the Teal TAC?
Sure. So obviously this has a huge screen. Some are going to see that as an advantage. Some are going to see the overall size of the GCS maybe as a disadvantage. That's really up to you. Obviously, a big screen is pretty cool, unless you're, for example, trying to carry lots of stuff. Only you can decide whether that's a good or a bad thing. The battery for the controller is the same as the battery for the aircraft. So we've got a pretty big, heavy battery. It's certainly overkill for a GCS, but it means that we've got one fewer part to carry around and mix up and get lost and so on. And it also means that the battery lasts for about 6 hours on this. So that's pretty great. As I mentioned, control input sticks, a little bit short. I find that to be a limitation, but again, it's just because I learned on something else. So you may not have a problem with that. Everybody loves this. We have the big red buttons underneath these covers so that we don't accidentally hit them. Wouldn't want that. This does enable a pretty neat feature with the Teal. We can disarm at any point in midair. None of these other platforms allow us to do that. While that might sound a little crazy, it's the fastest way to crash your drone. It's also a flexible way to land. It enables things like hand catching. If you want to land it in a vehicle, into a net, on a moving boat, or you want to hand catch or something, that does give you flexibility if you're very careful. 2 4-way switches here. That's a nice way to add a lot of physical inputs. So we've got buttons, but then we've got 2 of these 4-way switches. So that is quite nice. One limitation here is that we're using these buttons also as zoom and gimbal tilt. Generally, those would be scroll wheels. I certainly prefer scroll wheels. I think many would agree with that. But in any case, here we have buttons.
Fabulous. All right. So, ANAFI Sky Controller USA.
Okay. So if you were with us this morning, we looked at the newer version of the ANAFI USA commercial version controller. This is, of course, the Gov version of the controller, which is on the blue list. So this has always been a pretty great controller. It's very robust, like it's almost rubberized all the way around it. So I really don't feel like I can damage this very easily. Control sticks are nice and large. The screen also is quite large, not as large as the TAC. Maybe it's the perfect happy medium in my opinion. We also have a stylus hooked right in here. Now, this controller, in contrast to the commercial version of the ANAFI USA controller, allows us to do most functions with buttons and physical controls. So we could leave our gloves on for the duration of most flights, like if we were using gloves in some sort of tactical environment or if it's really cold out. We can get pretty much everything done without interacting with the touchscreen. However, if we need to, we have the stylus here, so we don't need to use our fat fingers or wet gloves or what have you. That's quite nice. We do have scroll wheels as well. I don't think there's much else I could say about
Omnidirectional antenna.
Liked it. We have an omnidirectional antenna here, in contrast to the commercial version.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So here, I'll talk a little bit about this one. So this is the Vantage controller. We really like this controller. This is the OG controller. There's a newer version of the Vantage, the Vision 2 controller, which is it's supposed to be it is a universal controller with radio module. So it's kind of, they're competing for the SROC, the Soldier Robotic Operations Control or something like that. But that's another U.S. Army or U.S. military platform for a universal control. So it is one option for that. And I think it's also probably important to note at these points, a lot of these systems will look at being controlled by some kind of third-party universal. We use the Tomahawk Robotics platform. There's a couple of other ones. But the Vantage Vision 2 is also another option that you'll be able to use as well. But we've always really liked the Vantage controllers for size and performance and many of the things. Did you want to add anything to that, Fraish?
It's very ruggedized. I really feel like I could drop this multiple times and nothing bad would happen to it. Possible exception of that scroll wheel, but buttons are sealed very well. The antenna is actually recessed right down in here, so even they could not be damaged in a serious fall. That's pretty great considering the market this is intended for.
Okay. All right, last one.
Okay, so this is probably my favorite of the bunch. This is the Skydio controller for the X10. It's, I think, pretty much the same as the previous version for the X2D. So first off, the build quality and ergonomics of this are just really good. Really good. It feels a little solid in hand, maybe a little heavy for the size, but it feels nice. The control sticks are nice and long. I'm not sure if you can see them there. We do have a certain amount of physical buttons, not as many as I would like. The system does sort of rely a little bit heavily on interaction with the touchscreen, which is actually quite small. I don't really mind that so much. Some people might. However, it becomes a limitation when you're constantly interacting with the touchscreen, especially in adverse weather conditions. If we've got like raindrops on the screen, if we're wearing gloves, if our fingers are cold, the touchscreens just don't work as reliably or precisely, and so that can be an issue at times. As you can see, we have this integrated cover which folds down over the screen and control sticks. That means we can stuff this into a pack without worrying about breaking it. This is really just rugged the way it is now. That also serves as the antenna and as a cover, a shroud for sun glare or for rain as well. So overall, I really like this thing. The screen could be bigger considering how heavily we rely on the touchscreen interaction, but all in all, I quite like this.
Excellent. So one of the things that we will continue to do our testing, but it's worth mentioning now, one of the main differences, particularly in the version 1s of these platforms, was the actual range of the platforms. And so the original spec was for a 3-kilometer range, and in our original testing, we did not get 3 kilometers with the Vantage. we got about 3.2, and again, these are in pretty ideal conditions with the Golden Eagle version of this, and we got about 4.2 for the Parrot. The Skydio, we got similar with the regular antenna. They had a directional antenna that we used as well, and we actually did get to about 8 kilometers with that. But conversely, with the X2Ds, we had many scenarios where we would get 800 meters. So the bugaboo of all of these non-Chinese systems has been the actual range. So it's been really tricky for BV loss. So we will do some more testing with the newer versions of these products and kind of update you on where we are with the range. But again, compared to DJI OcuSync or Autel, our experience has been you're not going to get anywhere close to the same range. The good news is most people's operations are going to be less than 3 kilometers anyway, and so we found these to be up to that task. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about sensors. So let's look at the RGB sensor to get us to get us started.
Well, I'd rather show you guys than tell you, but I will talk over this. Okay, so we've got 3 platforms here, and it's not really a fair fight in this regard. We're looking at the zoom capability of the RGB sensor or sensors for these platforms at a license plate from 100 meters away. And what we have is the Skydio X10, which has 2 RGB sensors, one of which has optical zoom lenses. Okay, so that's why we see such good results there. The graying out of that image is actually rain. So that is not a problem with the sensor. That's really the conditions. And I think it actually speaks to the quality of the sensor that we see so well in what was, moderately heavy rain from 100 meters away. The ANAFI USA, it has a dual RGB sensor configuration, one of which is a narrow field of view, the other is wider. So when we zoom in, it switches over to the narrow field of view. So we have an artificially zoomed in sensor, and from that narrow field of view, we then do digital zoom on top. And that's how we can get relatively good zoom capability in such a small package, small camera, a small payload on that drone. And I'm not sure if the audience can really read that license plate from the transmission we're doing right now, but in the raw image file, which you will be able to download from us, that is absolutely legible. And so I can say with confidence you can read a license plate from 100 meters away with the ANAFI USA. That's extremely impressive. The last image you see on the right there, that's the Teal 2. It just has a single RGB sensor. It's a very high resolution sensor. I think it's 64 megapixels or something, maybe 62. It's very high resolution, but this is showing us the limitations of digital zoom. If you start at a field of view that's relatively wide, appropriate for navigating, flying a drone in general use, you can't expect to just digitally zoom that in and have good results from far away. So this vehicle is not that far away. Like 100 meters is that's sort of the range, I think minimum range we want to observe someone from or something while remaining reasonably covert. And so there's just not a lot of detail there. Yeah, unfortunately for the case of the Teal 2 here, that's just the limitations of the sensor configuration it has. And so the wide range of image quality we're seeing now is really a hardware difference. It's not like a quality difference. It's a design choice difference.
Exactly. So I think one of the important things to note, again, this is where the size comes in, right? And so what we're seeing is obviously there's a big size difference from the platforms. You can kind of see pretty dramatically, even more dramatic if we look at the smallest one. Okay, and it's a weight, and the reason for that is battery life, larger battery, more stuff on there, smarter aircraft processing, and then obviously the sensor size. So when we compare sensors of these products, you know there's a huge size difference. And so Skydio has obviously looked at the strategy and said, we're going to go bigger so we can get a better sensor, and they've most certainly delivered with a much better sensor.
Yeah, it goes without saying. I mean, we're not supposed to mention it in this whole session, but I will say This sensor is actually comparable with like a DJI M30T. It's very good.
Okay,
It's
so
very good.
let's not let the cat out of the bag. Let's talk about the thermal now.
Okay, so because there's so many variables involved with thermal imaging, you know, ambient temp versus temperature of the subject, what material it is, we can never really do an apples to apples test that's really going to give you the results you need. So we do have some stuff to share. We'll upload it. You can download it and do your own assessment. But what I want to talk about are the sensor specs. And so what we have is the ANAFI USA. It's got a 320 resolution. Is that right, or is it
correct?
Okay, so 320 resolution.
So, and sorry, let me stop you right there. So the initial spec for the Blue sUas 1.0 was a 320 res sensor. So all of these platforms had the 320 on the version 1s, and those that have upgraded to Skydio and Teal have upgraded, now have the 640 res. Okay, so that's what you're going to see in terms of the performance. So sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No problem. So we've got on the ANAFI USA 320 resolution thermal sensor. On the Skydio, we have a 640 resolution thermal sensor with a 41-degree field of view. And for the Teal 2, we have 640 resolution sensor with a 32-degree field of view. So the ANAFI USA, it's not going to win this one with that sensor resolution. It's a generation older, we could say. And so, especially in the case of thermal imaging, when the resolution is so low to begin with, that is a dramatic difference that's immediately obvious as soon as you look at a subject from any kind of a distance away. So that's significant. Between the Skydio and the Teal, okay, so they both have the same resolution sensor. We really need to take the field of view into consideration, because this is really important with thermal imaging. The resolution is low. So if we have a narrower field of view, what we do is we get more pixels on target. So think of it as ground sampling distance, but not only relevant for mapping, also relevant for just general use. You have more pixels on your subject than you would if you had a wider field of view. And so in this one, I really do have to give it to the Teal. You guys will see this for yourselves. With the narrower field of view, it's just giving a much sharper, crisper, higher, sort of better defined image than the Skydio is. You guys will see this for yourself and do your own assessment. The trade-off of a narrow field of view is that you don't see as much in any one frame at any given time. I'm going to make the argument that you're flying a drone. You can just move the drone. You can yaw it or tilt the camera in like milliseconds. So what's more relevant is seeing the detail that you need to see on the ground from as far away as you can. And so that's why I really think field of view is important, and that it should be pretty narrow for thermal sensors. So Teal takes this one for the infrared imaging.
Okay. Wow. All right. Good job, Teal. Okay. Last one. Let's talk about some special features of all these products that we thought were cool.
Okay. So I'll start with the ANAFI USA. I guess it bears mentioning that the majority of these platforms don't really have much in the way of what I would call smart features that are enabled by AI or anything like that. What we have seen relatively recently, I think in the past year or so, come out for the ANAFI USA is the cursor on target feature, which it did not initially have. So this means we get the coordinates of terrain in the middle of our sensor. So we're looking at a slant angle at some terrain over there. The coordinates at that point on the terrain are actually reported to us rather than the coordinates of the aircraft's current location. So that's really important for lots of public safety and defense applications, perhaps for obvious reasons. So that's something that's not available with the other platforms just yet.
Okay.
Typically, it's enabled by a laser rangefinder, but the ANAFI USA has
the laser rangefinder.
Yes, the ANAFI USA has done it without a laser, and that's reasonably accurate.
Okay. We love our lasers.
Is it the lasers or the Austin Powers references that we love?
We love them both.
We
love them both. All right. Moving right along.
Okay. Teal 2 came can't say much in the way of sort of smart features. We'll come back to a general summary.
We'll talk about some of the cool
Sure.
things that we like about it, other than
I will
features.
say at this juncture that cursor on target is coming.
Yeah.
It may even have been in the latest release. It was like yesterday.
Possibly.
I would have to
We'll
check
let
the
you know.
notes.
We'll let you know in the notes.
Okay,
Yeah.
but it's coming. Okay, the Skydio X10. It's pretty much all about smart features.
It is, isn't it? So, I mean, we talked about the obstacle avoidance. That's the first thing that people talk about with any Skydio platform. And so you can make the argument that maybe you don't need it, and it has only a very few use cases where it's appropriate. But the thing is, it's class leading and it's pretty kick-ass. So when you see it flying around avoiding stuff, and the Skydio theory, which is relevant, is if we have pilots that aren't well trained and they're in certain areas, this is going to help them not crash the drone. And at the price of the drone, you don't want to be crashing too many of them. The other part of this, obviously, is they've done a great job of improving the sensor. The first round, they kind of had to use the same sensor as the Teal used, the FLIR Hadron, and somehow it just wasn't really good. Not really Skydio's fault. So Skydio built their own, and I think they have done a great job in improving that. So we like that. Obviously, the different triple props. You can kind of see if we put it up here, and then onboard processing and software. So Skydio is going big. That people are going to be running AI on these systems, on the system, and rather than on their controllers. That is something that we at RMUS absolutely agree with that, for a number of reasons that we'll talk about separately. And then you also have a lot of software options. Now they do add significant costs to the platform, but there are some pretty nice stuff. So the 3D scan available if you need to build rapid 3D models is great. Very solid product. We'll be testing that in depth with the LiDAR systems in May for our fixed wing platform. We'll have some of those, and then you've also got the night operation software. So that allows algorithms to address, which was really one of the weaknesses of the initial one, which it just didn't perform well at night and the sensors didn't work. So that, again, that is an additional cost, but you now have the ability to perform in tricky night situations. So that's the Skydio.
Okay.
And we should give the Vantage a little bit of props. So additional, we really like the new controller, and we'll talk about it individually. But
for smart features, can we talk about the swappable propulsion system? Is that still?
Yeah, that was I put it right under your desk there.
All right, so this is a Vesper in recon mode. It's quite quiet. It's designed to fly long and far. And what we can do is we can take the aircraft body, camera, electronics, and all that stuff, remove it from this propulsion system, set that aside, and take out this one. What is this one called again?
That's the shrouded rotor system.
The shrouded rotor system. Okay, so if we need to transition to indoor flight, same aircraft, and by the way, this is hot swappable, so we don't even have to power off and reboot again, and that magnetizes right on there. And we basically have an entirely new drone. So have you guys seen that before? That's pretty cool, right?
Yeah, so it's unique, and we'll, as we talk about it, and we're going to talk that one about that first. So that might be the segue. So do we have any other features we want to talk about before we delve deeper into the individual
We're
platforms?
running out of time, so let's get to conclusions. By the way, before we do, if there's questions from the audience, ask them now. We'll hopefully get to those at the end of the session.
Correct. So let's just talk about the Vantage. So Vantage has come out with a new controller, as I mentioned, a new system. This is still an old one. So the bottom line with Vantage is we still give them a not complete. It's really, really tough to get products. They have huge lead times. God bless them. Tobin, many believe he's the best of the engineers in the business, better than Skydio. It's a unique platform, but we just haven't had a lot of success with deploying these out in the wild, and certainly not at scale. And so right now, significant production delays. And I think They're on the SROC. They've got a small platform. I think they really need to focus on doing one thing really well and doing that. So,
and that's why we weren't able to include the Vesper in most of our testing parameters, is that we don't have a working one at the moment.
Good. All right. So next one. ANAFI USA.gov. So again, this is the military version. So this one is by far, this has the belt for Blue sUas 1.0 original versions. By far more of these out in the field with a wider variety of customers than any of these other ones, probably combined. It is an extremely versatile platform. It does everything pretty good. It's got a decent range. It's got good battery life. It's just a solid platform. You can use it indoors in a pinch, and it's proven. And Parrot has actually proven that they can operate at scale that none of these others really have. Now, obviously, this is with the sensor. This is a 3-year-old platform. Unlike the other two, they have not come out with a new platform. So from a sensor perspective, they're definitely a bit behind. But again, this is still an extremely viable platform.
Agreed. And it's actually really only in the thermal sensor area that they're significantly lagging. They were well ahead of the game with the dual sensor RGB configuration. So zoom performance of the color camera is very, very good. This is also the smallest, lightest, and quietest platform. If that's a priority for your operations, this is the one to consider. So really, who is this for? This is for pretty much anyone. It's a very general purpose platform. It's proven reliable, long history of use in the field. So Coast Guard
in the US uses it, so we know it works decently in maritime operations. It has by far the widest breadth of operations in addition to having them in use. So it's great. Now, the only downside, it's actually fairly cheap to repair everything except the main downside is if you ding the gimbal, you write the whole thing off. So that's the biggest weakness. It's not a replaceable gimbal, and that's an important consideration with the next platform. So Ariel, if you will. Okay, so we have the Teal 2, and again we've got the Canadian dollar. These are Canadian dollar prices. And so just to give you a ballpark, obviously once we've done this with the base kits, just so you have an idea. But when we did the Teal Golden Eagle, the 1.0 version, we said this platform had a lot of potential. And the issues we had with radio range and stability and battery life have, I would say, have certainly been improved. All of those areas, they're not perfect yet, but they're definitely improved. And everything that we loved about it is still around. So this is by far the most durable platform, blue, non-blue, anything. It is awesome. We have had horrific crashes with, so not we never crashed, but
I crashed that one yesterday.
Did you?
Yeah.
Okay, whatever. Mostly we haven't, but we've trained, probably 100 people on this platform already. So people are learning to crash things. And we've had one that was non-flyable after. And the good thing is, even if you ding them, all of the arms, motors, they can come off and be changed in field with one screw. This gimbal is totally replaceable. Again, it's not cheap. The cameras are, expensive themselves, but everything can be fixed in the field and it's durable. So our police friends would say it's fireman proof. And this is definitely the most fireman proof drone there is.
We've heard a new standard. It's even soldier proof. It's sailor proof.
Sailor proof.
Yeah.
Okay.
You can literally replace the gimbal in the field without tools.
Right.
You can replace the arms with a single bolt. It's kind of unheard of to be able to field swap a gimbal, actually.
Right. It's great. I love the Parrot. I really like this platform now. Now, the downside is, as we talked about, the flight time on the base is still not great, and it's still not as stable in higher winds as some of the other ones. However, I think as of now, they have an endurance kit available, which has longer arms and a double stack battery. I have not tested this ourselves, so I can't officially vouch, but I'm being told 40-minute flight time and much better stability, which makes sense with the longer arms.
Yes,
so obviously that's going to add a few $1,000s to the price, certainly, but hopefully we'll mitigate some of those downsides.
We expect that to improve the flight time, the speed, the wind tolerance, the stability of the platform. We haven't really highlighted those as major drawbacks of the Teal 2, but it could certainly use improvement in those areas, and so really excited for that.
It is, and I can't help it. I love George. George is great. George came up to visit in Canada several times, and really one of the bright young minds, along with Tobin, who's not as young, obviously, but also a great mind. Really, really, really impressive. So we're also starting to see this now in some naval operations. So we'll get more data on performance on ships as well. So we don't have a lot of data right now, but that's in process. So we're pretty excited about testing that.
So who's it for? If you need really rugged, durable, field repairable, widest temperature range, and best thermal. So really, this is like pretty hardcore and fairly military oriented platform.
And so kudos to Teal for a big improvement on this round. And I know if Parrot makes the same quantum of improvement that the Teal and frankly Skydio 2 does on their V2, then that's going to be a great product. So let's end up with the dare I say controversial, Fraser, the final one, the X10. Sure. So for those of you that missed our morning session, we talked quite a bit about did we achieve product parity with the Chinese systems? And what was our answer?
I was unwilling to comment on that. I think it's certainly comparable these days, but my view is that it's kind of apples and oranges. When we're talking about Chinese systems, we're talking about DJI and Autel, and there's a very different philosophy behind the user experience the Skydio is taking versus the Chinese manufacturers. And so it's hard to really compare them directly. It's almost like they do different things.
Perfect analysis. So we were not super excited about the X2D. We still aren't. Let's give Skydio props, right? There was a lot to complain about before, and Skydio did a great job. This platform is way better. I would classify it as a very good platform right now.
Absolutely, yeah. Especially in the optics. Okay, so thermal performance is very good. The zoom camera is like really, really good.
In addition to that, we talked to some of the features that they have, the onboard processing, exciting for AI, decent battery life again. So all of that is really good. So I think overall, Skydio, congrats on this one. You guys have done a good job.
Like with any Skydio platform, one of the real strengths of this is that you can take it and hand it to anyone, even if they've pretty much never flown a drone before, and they're very unlikely to crash. They're probably going to be able to use it at least somewhat effectively because it flies itself to a much greater degree than other drones do. The obstacle avoidance is phenomenal, even in kind of challenging environments. So for certain purchasers, that might be like a really critical thing.
Right. The other good thing about this is on the X2D, they did the old Silicon Valley software trick where we're going to ding you for recurring software. So it was an already more expensive platform that got even more expensive. For the base level autonomy software, it is now included a perpetual license with the aircraft. Good job on that as well, Skydio. But the price point is significantly higher than any of the other platforms on here. And then if you start to add on the software, you start to push it up significantly. So we have a base price of approximately 30,000 Canadian. We do not sell the federal one, so that's based on feedback we've gotten from the field. So if somebody from Skydio wants to correct us on that pricing, feel free, and we'll update it. But that's the ballpark we're being told. And again, software on top of that, so you can go significantly more. Downside.
Downsides, not particularly crisp flight controls. That means, for example, I'm not going to be able to use this to look in the window of a vehicle unless I'm like really sort of far away and using the zoom camera, like that may work. But my point is, you can't really position this thing very precisely. You're kind of suggesting what you want it to do, and then it does something like that. So it's not really designed for very fine flight maneuvers, which is interesting considering you might think of it as a platform that's well suited indoors. I say it's not really for that. Another downside, it's really expensive. That may be a huge factor. At night, it doesn't perform particularly well unless you have this add-on nighttime optical sensor package. Actually, I can also say that the nighttime performance, we didn't look at it here in this session, but we have some imagery you can download. The nighttime performance of the color camera is not particularly good. So thermal camera is great. Zoom camera works really well in the daytime, but not so well at nighttime. So that is a weakness. I'm only really nitpicking that because it's a really big strength of the platform in the daytime. I'm not saying necessarily that Teal or ANAFI USA would perform better at night with their color cameras, but that bears mentioning for this platform. Right?
And so I think with this, to sum it up, and I'll show you what I mean, and then kind of preface everything is one of our customers who had an in-depth demo of the product, and their comment I think was spot on, which is they said, it's everything we wanted the X2D to be and more, but it's too big for SRR operations. And so that's, again, I'm unfairly doing this because this is the smallest one, but it's a massive difference. They've done a great job in getting it to pack really small, so it's not a significantly larger pack. But there's a big difference. And so to me, this is, I would call a medium small sUas. So to me, this is somewhere between, for a lot of those applications, between one of these smaller ones and say a Lockheed Martin or an Ariane Sky Ranger that would be like an M300 medium size. And this is kind of that in between, like the M30T size, which has had sales challenges for DJI and Autel. And the issue is the bigger sensors have the interchangeable, or so the bigger aircraft have the interchangeable sensors, and they have ultimately better payloads than this one. They are more expensive in the most part. So is this going to compete with those? Whereas the smaller ones are much more portable, and even though the sensors maybe are not quite as good, they're still very good, and they have the advantages of being significantly lower in price and smaller and more portable. So I just worry for this one about the size range. And it's worth noting now that for the SRR contract in the US, they are in the finalists, but technically they didn't make the spec. They were too big for the spec. And so basically, I don't know if the Army has just decided that, hey, our mission parameters changed and we actually need a bigger platform to put all this stuff on, which is good. If we can hold more stuff, I think that's ultimately good. But again, it's going to really, really depend on your use case. So again, we'll be very interested to see how these are going to be deployed out in the field. So
yeah, just a comment on size. This thing, as far as we can tell, is not any louder, and the packed size is not much bigger. So you may feel that the size of the drone unfolded is really important, but there may be less tangible reasons that it's important than you really think.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. So there you have it. So if you have any more specific questions, reach out to us directly, Kevin at rmus.ca and Fraser at rmus.ca. We're over time, but if there's any questions, please drop them in the chat box. Right? Kind of crickets. I think we covered it.
I guess we nailed it.
All right. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Our final sessions will be Innovation Day tomorrow at 1, where we will have some interviews with Suncor and Ontario Power Generation on how they're deploying remotely operated robotics in their operations. So hopefully you can join us then. In the meantime, for Kevin Todrell
and Fraser Hahn
and ARM US Canada and all our team, thank you very much for joining us.